Some movies are disturbing. Yeah, I've seen the Star Wars prequels, but some movies are banned. These movies are so disturbing, so gross, so evil that they had to be banned from people being allowed to watch it. That's pretty crazy. Now, I made the illegal horror movies Iceberg a while ago, but I made sure there are no repeats here in this video, so don't worry. Now be sure to follow my Instagram, join my Discord, and most importantly, subscribe so I can overtake Karsten Runquist, who just did a video about this. Anyway, let's get into this banned horror movies Iceberg. Starting in layer 1, starting with Let Sleeping Corpses Die from 1974. Set in rural England, this movie follows two strangers, George, a biker on his way to fix a machine, and Edna, who gives him a ride, who get caught in the middle of a bizarre outbreak of the dead coming back to life. The cause isn't some curse or radiation from space, but a piece of experimental agricultural tech that uses ultrasonic waves to kill insects. The unintended side effect is that it starts waking corpses in nearby cemeteries. As the bodies pile up, the local police become convinced that George and Edna are deranged hippies on drugs who've gone on a killing spree. It's a kind of weird mix of environmental commentary and 1970s anti-authoritarian anger, showing how institutions blame youth and ignore science. What made it notorious at the time was its use of practical gore. Zombies tearing open stomachs, people's intestines being chewed, long shots of mutilation. It wasn't really funny or campy like a lot of later zombie movies. It was quiet, slow, and gross. When the UK went through its video nasties panic in the early 80s, it got pulled off shelves and prosecutors listed it as obscene. Malaysia also banned it, supposedly for the gore, but likely because of its anti-government themes about authority ignoring the truth. Zombie flesh eaters from 1979. Lucio Fulci's answer to Dawn of the Dead. This one starts with a derelict boat drifting into New York Harbor. Inside is a decaying corpse that suddenly attacks the police. That leads a journalist and a young woman to a cursed Caribbean island, where voodoo rituals and a mysterious doctor have reanimated the dead. The movie is infamous for its insanely realistic gore. A woman's eye slowly impaled on a splintered door frame, throat getting ripped out, and an underwater fight between a zombie and a shark literally shot with a real shark. Fulci used raw animal entrails and rubber prosthetics, which made everything feel way too authentic. In the UK, the uncut VHS got targeted during the video nasty trials, and cops raided stores that carried it. And it wasn't just singularly banned, it became an example of how far Italian horror had gone past the line. Other countries censored or cut specific moments like the eye scene or the throat ripping, but bootleg tapes circulated anyway. Despite how rough it was, fans today love it for the detailed practical effects and the strange mix of tropical adventure and corpse horror. The Beyond, 1981. Also directed by Lucio Fulci, which we're gonna have a lot of his movies in this Iceberg. The Beyond is less of a story and more of a nightmare. It's about a woman named Lisa who inherits a rotting hotel in Louisiana that just happens to sit on one of the 7 gateways to hell. When she starts renovating, she accidentally opens it, letting all kinds of surreal and demonic events unfold. A plumber is dragged into the wall by unseen hands, a woman's face is melted by acid, and at least 2 people have their eyes gouged out. The movie's not about logic, it's all about mood and atmosphere. Soft light, crumbling buildings, weird dream pacing. Because of that, it felt way more disturbing than a normal horror flick. In 1983, British authorities added it to the video nasties list for obscene violence, specifically citing the eyeball scenes and the spider attack that tears off someone's face. American distributors cut almost 11 minutes, which made the plot barely make sense. Italy was used to that kind of gore by then, so it got a normal release there, but other countries considered it one of the nastiest things ever made. Decades later, critics started calling it a masterpiece of surreal horror and restored the full version for festivals. The House by the Cemetery from 1981. This was another Fulci film film. By that point, he was basically the king of getting banned in Britain. It follows a family moving into a old New England home that's connected to a long-dead surgeon, Dr. Freudstein, who keeps himself alive by stealing people's organs. The family's young son starts seeing ghosts and hearing strange noises from the basement where the doctor is still lurking. It's full of claustrophobic atmosphere and nasty kills. Throats torn open, skulls crushed, knives through heads. The UK's BBFC cut 86 seconds just for the theatrical release. And then when it came to VHS, they kept chopping. By the late 80s, almost 4 full minutes were missing, making the movie, again, practically incoherent. Then again in 1992, another safe edition was released with 7 more minutes gone, bringing it down to barely over an hour. All the violence was stripped away along with key story beats, so it didn't even make sense. The uncut version wasn't approved until 2009 after the BBFC changed its policies and stopped banning movies just for being gross. For decades though, it was one of those films everyone talked about but almost no one could see in its entirety. Possession from 1981. There's no way I'm gonna be able to pronounce this director's name. Andrzej Zolowski's? Possession is a totally different kind of horror. It's not gory, it's emotional, psychotic, and sexual. It follows a married couple in Berlin, played by Isabel Adjani and Sam Neill, whose relationship collapses into madness. The wife starts having violent fits, and eventually it's revealed that she's been nurturing some kind of tentacled creature in a rundown apartment, a mix between a lover and a monster. The movie is shot like a nervous breakdown. Handheld cameras, screaming matches in public, people bleeding and convulsing in subway tunnels. The UK censors didn't know what to do with it, so it ended up on the video nasties list even though it wasn't a slasher. It was banned for a while mainly because of the and violence in combination with its unhinged tone. Later, film scholars re-examined it as psychological allegory about divorce, repression, and identity during the Cold War, but at the time, people just found it shocking. When it first played festivals, critics called it pornographic and insane. It slowly built a cult following because Adjani's performance was so raw and terrifying. She even won Best Actress at Cannes for it. And that's all I got for Layer 1, so let's get into Layer 2, starting with Evil Speak. Evil Speak is basically what happens when you mix a bullied kid revenge story with satanic computer tech. It's about a scrawny military cadet named Stanley Cooper Smith who's constantly humiliated by everyone around him. His classmates, his teachers, even the priests who run the school. One day he finds a hidden basement chapel that used to belong to a defrocked priest named Esteban who worshipped Satan. Inside there's an ancient Latin text, and because this is the early 80s, Stanley decides to type the whole thing into his computer to translate it. That somehow summons demonic forces through the computer, turning Stanley into a vessel for revenge. The ending gets wild. He telekinetically decapitates people, impales them, and a bunch of demonic pigs charge in to slaughter the rest. The effects are gory and over the top in that old school practical way. The British Board of Film Classification immediately banned it under the Video Recordings Act, calling it blasphemous and saying it might encourage real-life satanic behavior. The movie stayed banned for years until it was finally released with some of the violence cut, but even then it kept a reputation as one of the dumbest, bloodiest movies to ever be censored. Maniac from 1980. Maniac is grimy New York horror at its absolute dirtiest. The whole movie follows a guy named Frank Zito who lives alone in a tiny apartment surrounded by mannequins that he's nailed the scalps of his victims onto. He wanders the city at night, women, sometimes stabbing them, sometimes strangling them, and sometimes just shooting them point blank. It feels less like a slasher and more like being stuck inside the mind of a deranged loner. The kills are filmed in this raw, handheld way that makes them feel uncomfortably real. The most infamous moment is a shotgun blast to the head, done using a life cast of makeup artist Tom Savini himself. They filled it with real animal guts and filmed it guerrilla style in the streets with live ammo before running away away so the cops wouldn't show up. It's disgusting, but incredibly effective. The BBFC flat out refused to classify it in the UK, and it became a symbol of what they called depraved cinema. Theaters that dared show it faced protests. Even the Los Angeles Times refused to run ads for it. Critics said it was pure misogyny, but horror fans defended it for how unflinching it was. It didn't get an official UK release until 2002, and even then nearly a minute of footage was trimmed. Anthropophagus. This one is an Italian island horror that's basically all about shock value. A group of tourists end up stranded on a Greek island only to discover it's inhabited by a deranged cannibal who's been living off the bodies of shipwrecked victims. The cannibal himself looks horrifying. Rotted skin, bulging eyes, teeth worn down to nubs. Most of the movie is slow and atmospheric, but when the gore hits, it hits hard. There's one scene where he literally pulls a fetus out of a pregnant woman and eats it, and another where he rips his own intestines out near the end. Those two scenes alone got it banned all across Europe. In the UK, it was one of the original video nasties, prosecuted under obscenity laws for revolting content. Some video distributors tried cutting around those scenes and reselling it, but even the edited versions got confiscated. It took until the 2000s for the movie to get released uncut, but by then it had built a cult following for being one of the most extreme gut munchers ever made. It's not a good movie by any normal standard, but it's legendary for how unapologetically grotesque it is. God. Absurd/Horrible, 1981. Absurd, also known as Horrible, is kind of a spiritual sequel to Anthropophagus, made by the same director, Joe D'Amato. Instead of a desert island, this one's set in small-town America, where a Greek priest and a superhuman killer end up locked in a game of cat and mouse. The killer, Mikos, has this crazy regenerative ability after a failed Vatican experiment. So when he gets injured, his body just heals itself instantly like a low-budget Wolverine from hell. He spends the rest of the movie stabbing, drilling, and chopping his way through random victims, including a scene where he bakes someone's head in an oven. The gore is ridiculous. Guts spilling out, scalpels going into skulls, organs hanging everywhere. The BBFC banned it under the video's nasties list, calling it, quote, sadistic and gratuitous. Even the censored versions got rejected because there is no way to edit around the violence and still have the movie make sense. It stayed banned for decades, though bootleg copies kept circulating under titles like Monster Hunter. It's one of those grindhouse flicks that's so nasty and cartoonishly gory it became famous just for existing. The New York Ripper, 1982. Fulci again, and this is one of his most divisive films. The New York Ripper is about a serial killer terrorizing women across Manhattan, but it's filmed with the kind of sleazy, neon-drenched energy you'd see in a porn theater. The killer speaks in a Donald Duck voice, no joke, and uses razors, broken glass, and knives in brutal, prolonged murder scenes that focus on the victim's suffering. Fulci said he was trying to show the decay of urban life, but the movie was so relentlessly cruel towards women that it crossed into being unbearable to watch. The BBFC took one look at it and immediately refused classification, saying it was sadistic, misogynistic, and unfit for release. Even other European distributors hesitated. Some versions cut minutes of violence, others just refused to show it entirely. Critics were disgusted, not because it was supernatural or gory, but because of how real and mean it felt. It wasn't officially available in the UK until 2002, and even then, a full minute of violence was removed. The Boogeyman. This one's an American supernatural slasher directed by Uli Lommel. It starts with a kid watching his mom's boyfriend being murdered, and grows into a story about haunted mirrors and revenge spirits. Basically, a fragment of a mirror that witnessed the original murder becomes cursed, and anyone who touches it gets killed in different creative ways. Knives flying across the room, people getting strangled, the works. It's not an especially violent movie by modern standards, but the British censors didn't care. Like, if the Terrifier movies came out in 1980, I think that the British people would just, like, fucking assassinate Damien Leone. Like, they would not know what to do. And then, of course, under the video nasty panic, the Boogeyman got seized under obscenity laws, and they didn't even specify what made it obscene. They just lumped it in with everything else that had blood in it. It got an official release years later, but most of the damage was done. Ironically, all the attention from the ban gave it more fame than it ever would have earned on its own. The Driller Killer, 1979. This movie's legacy started with its poster, a blood blood-soaked close-up of a power drill going into someone's forehead. That image alone made the UK explode. Now, I will say, guys, that during this, it's very fun to just keep hearing about how British people get mad. The movie itself follows a struggling artist in New York who slowly loses his mind and starts drilling random homeless people to death. It's grimy, low budget, and shot like a student film, which makes it feel disturbingly real. It's not constant gore. There's a lot of wandering, city noise, and buildup, but when the killings happen, they're brutal. The advertising made it look way worse than it was, though. The VHS cover circulated without context and sparked outrage. It became one of the first titles seized in the video nasties crackdown, and it stayed banned for nearly 20 years. Even when it came back, the marketing was still controversial because of how it blurred the line between art, film, and exploitation. Now it's recognized as an early example of punk horror, but back then it was public enemy number 1 for censors. And that was layer 2. Let's get into layer 3, guys. Hope you're enjoying this so far. Totally not disgusting and weird and gross or anything. Sweet Movie from 1974. This movie is the definition of a movie that censors just couldn't deal with. It's split into 2 storylines. One about a beauty queen named Miss Canada who wins a contest for being the most virgin, marries a millionaire named Mr. Capital, and ends up humiliated and covered in milk and urine, and the other follows a woman on a candy boat through Amsterdam, engaging in political and sexual chaos, including scenes involving children and staged acts of bodily fluids. The goal of this movie, apparently, was to tear down capitalist and communist hypocrisy through absurdity, but the result was genuinely nauseating for audiences. There's unsimulated nudity, vomit, excrement, acts, and it's all shot like a surreal musical. The UK's BBFC straight up refused to classify it, calling it, quote, beyond acceptable limits, and several other countries banned it outright. Even the US only screened it at underground art houses. Yeah, this movie is fucked up, especially the scenes with children. The film's reputation became bigger than the movie itself, mostly known as that, quote, banned political poop movie, which is kind of funny. But the movie isn't funny because there's that fucked up shit in it. Begotten from 1990. Begotten is a black and white experimental horror film directed by E. Elias Merhige, and it's one of the most disturbing looking things ever shot. There's no dialogue, just a haunting sound design, and every frame looks like a decayed photograph. The movie opens with a godlike figure disemboweling himself, a woman emerging from his remains, and then giving birth to the, quote, son of Earth, who's later mutilated by faceless nomads. The whole thing plays like a biblical fever dream shot through 16mm static. It wasn't technically banned anywhere, but most theaters refused to show it. Film festivals that did include it had walkouts, and several countries gave it an underground-only classification because it was considered way too extreme for general release. And the imagery isn't gory in a normal way. It's ritualistic and hypnotic, like a snuff film from another dimension. For years, it circulated only on bootlegs and VHS copies until it got a limited DVD release. Even today, people argue over whether it's a masterpiece or the most pretentious horror movie ever made. Angst from 1983. This Australian horror movie by Gerald Cargill takes the idea of a serial killer film and makes it horrifyingly realistic. It's loosely based on real-life murder Werner Knicksk, and it follows a recently released convict who immediately goes out, breaks into a home, and kills an entire family in one night. The camera work is what makes it so intense. It's shot with long takes, wide lenses, and a constant shaky, over-the-shoulder style that makes it feel like you're trapped inside his head. There's no music to soften it, no stylization, just raw violence and panic. The killer narrates his own thoughts like he's explaining what drives him, and it's disturbingly casual. Even seasoned horror fans had trouble watching it when it came out. Censors in Germany and several other European countries either delayed or refused release because it looked too real. The distributor pulled it from cinemas almost immediately, and it spent decades underground until some people started praising it. Today it's seen as one of the most brutally honest portrayals of psychopathy ever filmed, but at the time it was too cold and cruel for mainstream audiences. In a Glass Cage from 1986. Set in Spain, this one's about a paralyzed ex-Nazi doctor who used to perform torture experiments on children. He's now confined to an iron lung, and one of his former victims tracks him down pretending to be his caretaker. Once inside, the caretaker turns into both a captor and a mirror mirror of his old abuser, continuing the same cycle of violence and humiliation under the guise of care. The entire film takes place inside this claustrophobic house, and it never gives the audience a break. The movie's tone is clinical and suffocating. No score during the worst moments, just breathing and machinery. When it premiered, several festivals had mass walkouts. Spanish and German censors demanded cuts, especially to the scenes implying sex. Critics were split between calling it art and exploitation. The director of the movie, another person whose name I'm not going to be able to pronounce correctly, Agustí Villaronga, I think, defended it as an allegory for generational trauma and Spain's fascist past. But the imagery, things I don't even want to say in a YouTube video, like even just saying it, made it nearly impossible to screen uncut anywhere for years. Brain Dead / Dead Alive from 1992. Before Peter Jackson became famous for The Lord of the Rings, he made what's possibly the goriest comedy ever filmed. Brain Dead, retitled Dead Alive in the US, takes place in New Zealand, where a guy's overbearing mother gets bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey and turns into a zombie. She infects half the neighborhood, and by the end, the hero is mowing down hordes of zombies with a lawnmower while blood sprays like a fountain. The movie is so absurdly over the top that it turns carnage into slapstick. Guts flying, limbs everywhere, a zombie baby fist-fighting priests. Some countries didn't see the humor though. Germany, South Korea, and Singapore all banned it outright for excessive gore. Others only allowed it after severe cuts, removing entire scenes of splatter. It became one of those you have to see it uncut tapes traded between horror fans in the 90s. Jackson's attention to detail with the practical effects and his gleeful tone made it legendary and weird, even if most of the world couldn't officially watch it for years. And that was Layer 3, guys. Let's get into Layer 4. This is getting pretty crazy. Inside from 2007. Inside is one of the most brutal films to ever come out of France's New Extremity movement. It takes place over one night. A pregnant woman named Sarah is home alone on Christmas Eve, still mourning her husband who recently died in a car crash. Suddenly, a strange woman shows up at her door claiming she needs to use the phone, but she's actually there to cut Sarah's unborn baby out of her stomach. The woman spends the entire movie breaking into the house, killing anyone who shows up, and tormenting Sarah. The kills are shockingly graphic. Scissors through faces, throats cut open, an officer's head blown apart by a shotgun. But the scene that pushed it into banned territory is the DIY Caesarean sequence near the end, which is a C-section. It's staged so realistically that censors in Germany, Norway, and New Zealand refused to rate it at all, which basically banned it from release. Australia only allowed it at film festivals, never in stores or theaters. France itself didn't censor it, but early reviewers called it obscene and unwatchable. Martyrs from 2008. This one's pretty famous. Martyrs is the movie that defined the peak of French New Extremity. It starts like a revenge film and slowly becomes something existential. A young woman named Lucy escapes captivity after being tortured as a child. Years later, convinced that she's found people responsible, she breaks into a suburban home and kills everyone inside. The first half is already intense, but then her friend Anna discovers a secret underground chamber and learns there's a cult that tortures women to try to create martyrs, or people who can see beyond death through extreme suffering. The film becomes unwatchable in its final act, showing days of beating, starvation, and eventually the flaying of Anna alive. When it premiered in France, the government's film classification board gave it an 18+ rating, which at the time was equivalent to a commercial ban. Major theaters wouldn't show it and advertisers couldn't promote it. The filmmakers appealed and got it downgraded to 16+, but not before it became infamous as the movie that broke France. Critics were divided. Some said it was profound and tragic, and others said it was just torture porn. The director defended it as a spiritual horror movie about trauma and transcendence, not cruelty, and he refused to cut a single frame for any release. Still, a few countries forced edits, and for a while it was considered the most disturbing modern horror film ever made. The Human Centipede 2 from 2011. The first Human Centipede was already disgusting, but it was campy. The sequel, directed again by Tom Six, stripped away the humor and leaned fully into body horror. It follows Martin, a mentally disturbed parking garage attendant obsessed with the original movie, who decides to recreate the centipede himself, only this time using 12 victims and no anesthesia. The movie is in black and white, but that doesn't make it any easier to watch. There's self-harm, and extremely graphic surgery scenes. When the BBFC first reviewed it, they outright refused classification, calling it unremittingly sexually violent and potentially obscene. In the UK, that meant it couldn't be sold, streamed, or shown anywhere. Tom Six complained publicly, calling it censorship of art, and submitted a re-edited version with about 2 minutes and 37 seconds cut, removing scenes of sex and certain gore shots, which finally got an 18 rating. Australia and New Zealand also banned it, while the US got it unrated because the MPAA wouldn't touch it. The controversy actually helped the movie. People bought the uncut import editions purely to see what was missing. Modern Set Pieces from 2004. This one is more infamous than well known, mostly because it was so mean-spirited it got rejected almost everywhere. Directed by Nick Palumbo, it's about a Nazi-obsessed photographer in Las Vegas who lures women into his studio to kill and film them. The movie mixes graphic murder scenes with unsimulated acts, you know what I mean? And even includes stock footage of real of real stuff that happens in horror movies, which is why censors came down so hard on it. The BBFC refused to classify this one, also citing sexual and real imagery of, even the edited US DVD was heavily trimmed, nearly 20 minutes shorter than the festival cut. Palumbo defended it as an art film about American decadence, but nobody bought that. Frontiers from 2007. Frontiers came out right after France's 2005 riots, and it feels like a political panic attack disguised as a slasher. A group of young criminals flees Paris during the chaos and hides in a rural inn, only to discover the owners are literal neo-Nazis who run a torture camp under their farm. It's directed by Xavier Gens, who went on to make Hitman and The Divide. But this early film is pure brutality. Power tools, hooks, cannibalism, endless screaming. The violence is relentless, but unlike a lot of exploitation films, it's got a political edge about nationalism and class. The MPAA in the US gave it an NC-17 for strong sadistic violence, which most theaters wouldn't screen, so it got released unrated instead. Some DVD versions trimmed apart to the violence, especially a throat and genital scene. God. In the UK and France, it was released intact, but even there, critics said it pushed things too far. Haute tension, or high tension, was one of the early signs that French horror was about to get unhinged. Released in 2003, it's about two college girls visiting a farmhouse, only to be attacked by a sadistic killer in the middle of the night. One of them tries to hide and fight back, and the movie's first half is an incredibly tense, realistic home invasion thriller. Lots of crawling through dark rooms, brutal weapon kills, and quiet panic. Then there's a major twist halfway that changes everything about who the killer actually is. The gore effects were all practical, and they went really far with it. Decapitations, impalements, and extended throat. The MPAA in the US demanded cuts to release it with an R rating, specifically toning down the beheading and saw blade scenes. The uncut version was released unrated later on DVD. Some countries considered banning it, but it mostly just got slapped with an 18+ or restricted ratings for sustained graphic violence. And that's the end of Layer 4, guys. Let's get into Layer 5. Here we go. We're still going. Antichrist from 2009. Lars von Trier made Antichrist after going through a major depressive episode, and you can feel that pain in every second of this movie. The movie follows a married couple, played by Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg, who retreat to a cabin in the woods to process their grief after the death of their child. Instead, everything unravels into psychological collapse, self-mutilation, and religious horror. There are long stretches of quiet, eerie dread, but when the violence starts, it's extremely graphic. There's generation, a scene where a character is drilled through the leg, and that are partly unsimulated. Von Trier shot it like a nightmare. Slow motion, classical music, close-ups of insects, all meant to feel like some ancient punishment is unfolding. When it premiered at Cannes, people fainted and walked out, while others gave it a standing ovation. Critics argued about whether it was genius or misogynistic torture porn. The BBFC surprised everyone by passing it uncut in the UK, calling the violence justified by its themes of grief and guilt. In France, the film got reclassified from a 16+ to an 18+ after protests. It's not banned anywhere now, but it's still one of the most infamous examples of art film gone feral. Wedding Trough from 1974. Wedding Trough, also known as Vase de Noces, is a Belgian art film that sits right on the line between experimental cinema and total obscenity. It's about a lonely man living on a farm who develops a certain fixation on one of his pigs. He starts sleeping with it, and after the animal gives birth to piglets, he kills them, leading the mother pig to drown herself. The man later ends himself too. There's no dialogue, no music, just ambient sounds of the farm and long static shots that make everything feel uncomfortably real. The director claimed it was an allegory for humanity's relationship with nature and death, but the actual imagery is so hard to stomach. The pig's death was real. It was filmed during an actual slaughter, and that alone caused outrage. Australia's classification board flat out refused it, calling it abhorrent and lacking redeeming artistic merit. Multiple appeals to get it shown at film festivals were rejected. To this day, it's used in debates about whether art can justify animal cruelty. It was banned in several countries and never received a mainstream release anywhere. The Green Elephant from 1999. This Russian underground film by Svetlana Baskova was made on a shoestring budget and shot mostly in a real basement. It shows two junior officers imprisoned for unclear reasons during the late Soviet era. What starts as boredom quickly devolves into humiliation, violence, and complete psychological collapse. They talk about war, eat filth, and torture each other until they go insane. It's ugly, handheld, and deeply uncomfortable to sit through. And this movie is not just disturbing, it's meant as political provocation. Baskova used the story to mock Russia's military culture, showing soldiers as violent, traumatized, and depraved. It was banned in Russia almost immediately after being released because of its graphic sexual use of real blood from slaughterhouses, and criticism of authority. For years, it circulated only through bootlegs and the internet, where it developed a cult following. Some people treat it like a meme now, but when it came out, it was a genuine act of rebellion. It's still officially banned in Russia, though copies are pretty easy to find online. Lucker the Necrophagus. Lucker is a Belgian low-budget horror movie about a serial killer who escapes from a mental hospital and goes on a murder spree, eventually finding and doing adult things with the decomposing body of one of his past victims. It's about as tasteless as it sounds. The director made it as a statement against what he saw as pretentious European art films. He wanted to make something so offensive and disgusting that it couldn't be mistaken for high art. The result was barely distributed. The producer was so horrified that he destroyed most of the original film prints, and it only survived through bootleg VHS copies. When it finally resurfaced in the 90s, it was banned in several countries for obvious reasons. The acting and sound design are terrible, but the imagery earned it a permanent place on lists of one of the most disturbing movies ever made. Later on, collectors started treating it like a piece of underground history, but it's still mostly remembered as a one-time shock experiment that went exactly as far as it could without breaking actual real laws. Now, that was Layer 5, guys. Let's get into Layer 6. It's about to get even worse somehow. Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom from 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's final film is one of the most infamous movies ever made. It's an adaptation of the Marquis de Sade novel, but relocated to fascist Italy near the end of World War II. The plot follows four powerful men, a duke, a bishop, a judge, and a magistrate, who kidnap teenagers and imprison them in a remote villa, subjecting them to months of stuff. You know, I mean, you get it by now. It's divided into circles inspired by Dante's Inferno, escalating from humiliation to forced eating of eggs to execution. Pasolini was making a political allegory about fascism and power, but the realism and cruelty of what's shown made that message almost impossible to digest. It was obviously banned immediately in Italy, with police seizing prints and prosecuting distributors. Over the next few decades, it was banned or heavily censored in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and several European countries. Even when uncut versions became legal, many theaters refused to screen it. Pasolini was murdered 3 weeks before the premiere, run over and beaten to death in what's still a mysterious case, which is really weird and sad. Cannibal Ferox. Furrow? I am not sure. This was Umberto Lenzi's attempt to outdo Cannibal Holocaust, and it became one of the most censored films in history because of it. The story follows a group of anthropologists traveling into the Amazon to debunk myths about cannibalism, only to be captured by a tribe that decides to, well, prove them wrong. It's full of brutal violence, castration, impalement, and scenes of real animal deaths, including a turtle and a pig being on camera. The gore was so explicit that the UK banned it outright under the Obscene Publications Act, and even Italy forced edits. The movie was marketed under the tagline "banned in 31 countries," which wasn't literally true, but helped make it famous. In the US, it was released heavily cut, and even then it caused outrage. The director defended it by saying it was anti-colonial and meant to criticize Western exploitation, but that really didn't fly. Most of its reputation comes from how far it pushed fake and real violence at the same time. Philosophy of a Knife from 2008. This Russian-American movie by Andrei Iskanov is a 4-hour docudrama about Japan's Unit 731, the secret military unit that conducted live human experiments during World War II. It mixes archival footage, interviews, and graphic reenactments of vivisection, frostbite tests, and biological weapon trials. The reenactments are relentless. Long scenes of surgery without anesthesia, teeth being pulled, and insects inserted into open wounds. It's meant as an expose, but the tone feels more like extreme horror. Most festivals refuse to screen it, and several countries, including Germany and Australia, banned it outright. Even the historical community criticized it for sensationalizing real atrocities. Iskanov claimed he wanted to show the truth that history books hide, but critics accused him of exploiting war crimes for shock value. Now, when I was researching this movie, I thought it was really interesting and weird. This movie is 4 hours long. 4 hours long. Slaughtered Dolls. Directed by Lucifer Valentine, Slaughtered is one of the most reviled underground horror movies ever made. Valentine called his style gore, which sums it up pretty well. The movie follows a stripper named Angela who spirals through hallucinations of, I'm sure you can fucking guess. The story is basically non-existent. It's edited like a nightmare, jumping between so many different bad things. I'm tired of saying these words, bro. I feel like every time I say sex or torture, my lifespan gets decreased by an hour. I feel disgusting, dude. The actors were mostly people from fringe scenes, and there have long been rumors that some were genuinely fucked with during production, not an actor, though nothing's been proven. Film festivals and distributors rejected it across the board. It wasn't banned by name in most countries just because it was never submitted, and nobody would even touch it. Most extreme horror labels hesitated to release it. It circulated in bootlegs and DVD-R copies among collectors who wanted to see how far underground cinema could actually go. This is the kind of shit that, dude, if you like this movie, that's I mean, dude, you're not, it's not a movie. This is, God, bro, this is not a movie. August Underground from 2001. This one comes from Fred Vogel, an American filmmaker who wanted to make a fake snuff movie so realistic it would disturb even hardened horror fans. August Underground follows two killers who kidnap, do stuff, and, get rid of random victims while recording everything on a handheld camera. There's no plot and no context, just non-stop degradation. When Vogel tried to bring a copy of the film into Canada for a screening, he was actually arrested at the border and charged with transporting obscene material. The gore effects in this movie were all practical and uncomfortably convincing. The movie was refused classification in multiple regions, and shipments of the DVD were seized in places like Australia and the UK. Vogel actually went on to make 2 sequels to this movie, each pushing things even further, but the first remains the most infamous. Now guys, I am happy to tell you this is the end of the Iceberg. Thank you for watching so far. This shit is so interesting, but so disturbing. Thanks for watching. I had a good time with this one overall. So yeah, everybody that's watching, thank you. Have a great night and sweet dreams.